Good afternoon and welcome to the 32nd Congressional District debate hosted by the Dallas Regional Chamber in partnership with WFAA. My name is Dale Petrosky and I'm the President and CEO of the Dallas Regional Chamber. We want to thank our event partners, the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce and the Richardson Chamber of Commerce, for helping us host this today. We are excited about the debate today between incumbent Democratic Congressman Colin Allred and the Republican challenger, Genevieve Collins. We want to thank Congressman Allred and Genevieve Collins for agreeing to participate in today's debate and sharing with us their views on the issues that are important to all of us. In just a minute, I'm going to turn things over to our moderator today. But before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. At the DRC, we have a staff of about 50 full-time professionals who work every day to make Dallas the best place in America for all people to live, work, and do business. One of the ways we do that is to focus on public policy issues that impact all of our lives. Issues like transportation and taxes, regulations, energy, jobs, education and workforce, and of course, economic stimulus in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We work closely with elected officials on both sides of the aisle, at all levels of government, City Hall here in Dallas and Collin County and Denton County. We work in Austin with our state legislators and state leaders, and we work in Washington, D.C. with our leaders there. We work with our allies, including the North Dallas Chamber and the Richardson Chamber of Commerce, to ensure that we are all positioned for economic prosperity and a great quality of life in this region. So that's why today we are so proud to host this congressional debate for a district that's drawn a lot of national interest because it flipped from a Republican seat 2 years ago to a Democratic seat. We'd like to thank WFAA, who's a DRC member company, for their commitment to quality journalism that informs thousands of viewers across our region and the state of Texas every day. I'd like to remind you that early voting is happening now through Friday, October 30th. Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd, less than 2 weeks away. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's debate, Jason Whiteley, the award-winning senior reporter at WFAA and host of Inside Texas Politics. Jason, thanks for agreeing to be our moderator today, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right, Dale, thank you very much. We'll talk about the format first to lay this out so our viewers can understand kind of the roadmap of where we're going. Each candidate is going to get 2 minutes for kind of opening remarks here, and we're going to ask 5 questions of both candidates. And these questions have not been shared with the candidates ahead of time. They don't know what they are. I've had the questions solely as well. Each candidate will get 1 minute to respond to each question and then a minute to rebut the other's answers as well. After our questions, we're going to take questions from the audience. So if you can just keep that in mind, if you have a question you'd like to ask the candidates, enter that into the chat function of your browser there, and those will be forwarded on to me during the debate here. We're going to wrap up the Q&A and be finished at 1 o'clock this afternoon. We're going to give each candidate 1 minute to kind of close up their thoughts and kind of offer a last minute pitch to voters as well. So now with that, let's introduce our candidates. We'll go ahead and have both of them turn their cameras on now. Democratic Congressman Colin Allred, in his first term representing the 32nd Congressional District. He serves on 3 congressional committees, transportation and infrastructure, they're congressman, foreign affairs and veteran affairs as well too. He is a Dallas ISD grad, as you may know, and Congressman Allred previously served in the General Counsel's office at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Republican challenger Genevieve Collins. She is a local businesswoman. She's head of corporate strategy at iStation. It's an education technology firm in Northeast Dallas, and she is a 7th generation Texan and a graduate of SMU's Cox School of Business. So with that, thanks for joining us. I know there are some races out there, guys, who the candidates don't want to meet in a debate, and it means a lot that you guys are not only meeting in a debate, but meeting several times. So we appreciate you taking time for us this afternoon.
Jason.
We appreciate you being here, Colin, and Genevieve as well too. Let's start with the first question. Another round of stimulus has failed in Congress. It's stalled between the White House and the Democratic congressional leaders. There's no agreement in sight. And this comes after we saw several other previous stimulus packages passed with bipartisan support. So if elected, Congressman Allred, what will you do to ensure that North Texans get results and not just partisan politics out of DC?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Jason, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this, and thanks to the Dallas Regional Chamber and the other chambers involved with this. You're right. We passed the CARES Acts 1 and 2 and created about $4 trillion worth of aid that did allow us to get to the summer and have this economic crisis and the public health crisis not be as bad as it could have been. And then in May, the House decided that we needed to continue those efforts, and we passed the HEROES Act, as you probably know, $3.4 trillion in the HEROES Act we passed in May to try and predict and understand that the virus is going to continue to affect us, to continue to impact our economy. And at that time, Senator McConnell said that he was going to take a pause and see what happened. Well, what has happened is that 220,000 Americans are dead, 12 million jobs have been lost. And again, a couple weeks ago, we tried to pass a compromise bill, a HEROES 2.0 at just $2.2 trillion to try and meet in the middle here and come down and find an agreement. And we're still unable to do that. And even now, as discussions are ongoing between the House and the White House, Mitch McConnell and the Senate is saying that whatever we agree to, they likely.
Congressman, I think you've had a digital hiccup there. You're out of time. We'll see if we can get your shot reestablished there. Ms. Collins, same question for you as well, too. If elected, what do you do to ensure that North Texans actually get results and not just partisan politics in this time of stress for so many families?
Yeah, Jason, you're right. It's been a tough year for all of us. And we've had both a public health crisis as well as an economic crisis. And we have to treat these things as they're fundamentally intertwined and not two separate issues. We have far too many people in Congress paying party line politics, only trying to pass their agendas and not really serve our community. What I would do as Congresswoman is ensure I'll bring my business experience, creating jobs, balancing a budget, and forecasting growth to our community. I'll also make sure that we provide economic relief and laser targeted relief for small businesses. I think that doing huge $1 trillion packages instead of targeted relief is the wrong way to manage a crisis. And I think that what we have to also do is look at startups and entrepreneurs. How do we give them working capital to be productive? And how do we ensure that we beat this virus from a health perspective once and for all with faster testing results, with more accurate test results, and making sure that all of our American citizens have access to a vaccine if they choose to take it.
Congressman, it looks like your signal is back up. You can just wave to us. We see you smiling there. Just want to make sure you are back up. Your time was out for that answer. But our next question now is to Ms. Collins here. Texas leads the country in the number of uninsured residents, an embarrassing statistic in a state that likes to brag about itself for a lot of things. And that number is likely to grow as this pandemic continues. So after years of complaining about the Affordable Care Act, the Republican Party has yet to introduce any alternative to it. So the question is, if elected, what is your plan, Ms. Collins, to increase access and affordable health coverage to Texas residents?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've been upfront and honest about what my own belief systems are. Republicans have failed the United States people by not having a replacement. And I think that it's time that we be honest about this and actually reform the Affordable Care Act, because that's what we need to be doing. I believe that we need to ensure that there's more access to telemedicine. I think that unlike what my opponent has been trying to slay me on television, I think we have to protect people with pre-existing conditions. I would never sign on to any bill that would take away any or deny any coverage for pre-existing conditions. But the Affordable Care Act did limit competition in the marketplace and create an insurance oligopoly. That has to change. We need to have more insurance providers to be able to have more flexibility, reduce premiums, increase access, and increase the quality of care. That's how we get this thing more effective, where we can expand coverage, but we don't have to do that through government-run healthcare, which my opponent is about to tell you that he supports.
Congressman Allred, that same question for you, sir. What's your plan moving forward to increase access and affordable health coverage for Texans? Because it's an embarrassing statistic we have here in the state.
It is, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse. About a third of Texans under the age of 65 don't have health insurance right now. And just yesterday, my opponents said on TV that people with pre-existing conditions are worse off under the Affordable Care Act than they were before it. I mean, let's talk about the bad old days before the ACA, when you could be discriminated against because you'd had a baby, like my wife, or because you had breast cancer, like my mom. The days when we had lifetime caps on your coverage, so kids like Olivia Solis, Miguel Solis's daughter, who was born with a heart defect, would have blown through their coverage in the first few months of her life. The days of high-risk pools and coverage that was so expensive you couldn't even afford it. That's what she wants to go back to. And I think we can do much better than that. I think we can expand coverage and lower costs. And it begins with competition. I do support Joe Biden's plan to try and introduce a public option. We also have to address the costs in our prescription drug arena, because far too many Americans, far too many Texans can't afford their prescription drugs. My opponent has said that we should let the prescription drug companies pick their prices. I think we should negotiate and allow Medicare to negotiate the way we do with the VA to lower costs for everyone.
Well, let's expand on this for 2 more minutes. I'm going to give both of you another minute here to talk about this, because prescription drugs is one thing even President Trump has talked about, trying to lower the prices for so many Texans out there and for so many Americans out there who are facing that. Genevieve, I want you to respond to what the congressman said. I'm going to let him have another minute after you go first here.
Well, sure. First off, and let me clarify my statement from yesterday. People with pre-existing conditions are covered, but if they're in the individual market, they're not able to actually get coverage at UT Southwestern, at Cancer Centers for America. People that need very targeted and specific relief aren't able to be insured at the best tier 1 hospitals to get the coverage that they need. That's unacceptable. That's worse off. What we have to do is ensure that we have more competition in the drug price market. Our drugs cost way too much. I believe in price transparency. I just spent 2 weekends in the hospital. I just got my bill yesterday for how much that costs. It costs $36,000 to spend 2 weekends in the hospital having 2 emergency surgeries. If we have a more informed consumer base that's able to question why Big Pharma and why medical companies are charging us so much, we're going to be able to demand change. But also, we're going to be able to close loopholes for Big Pharma changing prices and changing their molecular structures on patents. That's how we increase generics into the marketplace and decrease prices.
How are you feeling, by the way, right now?
Thank you. I'm feeling much better. It's been a wild journey, to say the least, having spent 2 weeks on bed rest, but I appreciate you asking, and thank you. And thank you to the congressman for his flexibility during this time as well. I sincerely appreciate it.
We're glad you're back. Congressman, you get a final minute on this topic here of healthcare that's so important to so many Texans.
Well, first of all, my family and I are on the individual market right now, as all members of Congress are, and we can get care at any of the hospitals that Ms. Collins mentioned. I think she may be confusing Medicare reimbursement rates and the ACA. The ACA is offering private insurance. And yes, those costs should be lower. And I think we can do that through competition. But it's not like it's being turned down at hospitals. That's just not true. And when it comes to prescription drugs, price transparency alone is not going to be enough. And it's not going to get the job done. We need to make sure that we actually have some leverage and that we can hold these prescription drug companies that are gouging the American people accountable through these specific drugs that we know don't have a competitor in the market. And that's what I really want to stress here, Jason, is that this is only for the drugs that don't have a market mechanism to keep those costs down. Those are the drugs that we can negotiate the prices, like insulin, where 1 in 4 Americans can't afford their insulin and are rationing, to make sure that folks don't have to choose between putting food on their table and paying for their prescription drugs.
All right, you're perfectly on time there. I don't know if you rehearsed that answer or not, but man, that was on the money. Let's zoom out for a moment and shift off to another topic. Congressman Allred, North Texas, as you well know, even the 32nd Congressional District, home to a number of large international businesses. What is your approach, considering that? What is your approach to international trade agreements, whether bilateral, multilateral, or whatever the case may be? How do you go into those, and where's the opportunity in the next 2 years?
Well, let's be clear. Texas is the #1 trade state in the country. We are the #1 trade state with Mexico, and we're the #2 trade state with Canada. Our third largest trading partner is China. And so we rely on trade for our economy. And I believe in free trade, but also in fair trade. And that's why I really am proud of the work we did on the USMCA trade agreement that passed the House, when really it would not have passed the House before I and others in the Texas delegation worked on it and made it into what I think is really a model trade agreement that both the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO supported, because it has enforceable labor standards, it has forward-looking provisions, and that's the kind of model I think we're going to try and use going forward for trade deals, because we can't just have trade that allows the exploitation of American workers, but we need that trade and we need those markets for our goods. And what I do certainly disagree with, Jason, is this administration's use and kind of chaotic approach to trade wars that I think has dramatically impacted us here, from Texas Instruments to fossil watches that are both in my district. That uncertainty has really hurt us.
Of course, for our viewers, the USMCA is the bipartisan solution, or the new bill that replaced NAFTA that had been around since the early 90s. Ms. Collins, same question for you. How would you approach international trade agreements, whether bilateral, multilateral, et cetera?
Well, it's high time that we renegotiate a lot of these trade agreements. Our American economy, American workers, and American jobs have been taken advantage of by far too many countries, specifically China, for far too long. I was active in promoting USMCA in my own campaign because it is the right thing to do. Mexico is our largest trading partner by an order of magnitude of $100 million. But we need to be able to have free and fair trade. I'm glad my opponent believes in my same principles, but we can't be taken advantage of. And I think that we need to continue to have more of these conversations, bilateral conversations. I think the U.S. has a lot more negotiating power than the congressman gives us credit for. As a businesswoman, I would bring my own business experience in negotiating at the table, talking about what it means to allow us to have better trade practices, more economic freedom, more jobs back into the American economy, while also promoting American consumerism. That's why these countries have been taken advantage, or have taken advantage of us, and it's time we take charge back.
I want to expand on this one as well, too, and specifically ask you, Ms. Collins, and Congressman, I'll give you a moment to respond. But what specifically, you mentioned that there are some unfair agreements out there. Which countries have unfair agreements with the United States that you seek to change?
Well, when I was 25, Jason, I went overseas to look at different potential opportunities for iStation to be able to teach English as a foreign language. I looked at China, South Korea, Japan as all potential new office satellites for us. What I noticed when I was in China is that they don't allow us to have intellectual property. They promote intellectual property theft. They put American companies into forced knowledge transfers, which is totally unacceptable, put us in joint ventures that squeeze American companies out within 7 years. And China has been taking our jobs. They own our medical supply chain. We've got to bring this back. China has long been taking advantage of us, even practicing cyber espionage during the pandemic. I'm horrified that my opponent voted against sanctioning the Chinese Communist Party for their espionage. They're continuing to undermine American interests, American democracy, and American companies and jobs and workers. They have to be held accountable.
Congressman Allred, I want to give you a minute to respond to that.
Yeah, well, listen, we have stood up to China, but need to do more. But the way we do that, is through smart policy. You know, this administration and its pursuit of this trade war that they've followed has only hurt our economy and really passed on additional costs to the consumers and hurt folks like Fossil Watches and Texas Instruments. But you talked about bilateral versus multilateral trade agreements. I believe that we can do both, but that certainly it's better, particularly in the Asian arena, for us to have multilateral agreements like the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement that this president opposed and which I supported, that would have allowed us to combine so many of the economies in that region in a coalition against China. And that's how we stand up to them, is by forming coalitions with the democracies, with the nations over there that are willing to work with us to box out China and to box them in many ways and try to prevent them from doing some things that they do, like stealing IP, like having, I think, really manipulating their currency. They have a lot of, anti-competitive actions they take. But we do that by bringing together all of the world, and that's how we stand up to China.
Well, let's shift off to a different topic here. This is a hot topic that the nation really experienced earlier this year and still is experiencing. The killing of George Floyd. That led to a movement across the country calling for police reforms at departments everywhere. Do you believe need to be made right now to help build trust between our communities and the police departments?
Well, Jason, I fundamentally believe that we can knit the fabric of our communities back together without defunding the police. I spent my summer listening to our Black leaders and our Dallas Police Department, really understanding what the different conversations are being had. We've got to have meaningful police reform. We've got to have dash cams and body cams to promote transparency. We've got to have a federal registry of bad cops. A few does not qualify or give credence to the many great cops who are pillars of the community. But we need to know who the bad cops are so we can weed them out and never experience what happened to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or countless others ever again. I also think that we have to have a real conscious conversation about how we're enforcing the law, because every American should be treated equal and is equal in the eyes of the law, and we are not practicing that across our country. And I think that it's time that we have that conversation and work to remove race bias and work to ensure that everyone is treated equally and treated equally in the eyes of the law.
And same question for you, Congressman. And Genevieve just mentioned a federal registry of bad cops. What are the other opportunities today that lawmakers can take to improve the relationship between police departments and communities?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think Ms. Collins' comments are consistent with the campaign that she has run, one in which I think she is trying to use this as a wedge issue to scare up votes. And that, in my opinion, is part of the problem that we face when we're talking about police reform and how we're going to restore confidence between our law enforcement and our communities of color, address our criminal justice system. We can't go around demagoguing on this issue. And if you're watching TV right now, you'll probably see an ad for my opponent doing just that. So what have we done in the House to try and address this? Because the Congressional Black Caucus that I'm a part of was really at the core of introducing the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that we passed a few months ago. It banned chokeholds, which Dallas already does. It banned no-knock warrants. It limited qualified immunity. It created a registry, as Ms. Collins mentioned. It provided for anti-discrimination training. It provided for body cameras and the ability to store body camera footage. And it ended some of the military equipment we've seen flowing to our police departments that have, seen some of them show up in some of our communities looking like the Army instead of the police. So we're trying to reform our system, but passing laws is not going to be enough. We have to also address some of the underlying social issues. And campaigns like the one my opponent is running contribute to those issues, not taking them down.
Well, Jason, let's just talk about that for a moment, because the reality is my opponent's record is the thing that's on trial today. My opponent took out $600 million from the HEROES Act 2.0, if you will, took out $600 million of funding. There was $3 trillion of funding allocated in that budget, in that bill. He could have taken out or advocated against taking out $1 trillion for bailing out failed state and local governments. He could have advocated against giving $6,000 payments to illegal immigrants. He could have advocated against a myriad of Democrat wish list items that are long range, not laser focused, targeted, but instead he followed Nancy Pelosi, who he votes with 100% of the time, who decided that after this entire summer and Democrats only talking about defunding the police, enabling Antifa and riots across our community, that they would take out $600 million in their own bill for our police. I think that's unconscionable and unacceptable.
Congressman Allred deserves a response to that. Go ahead, please.
Well, I think you heard some demagoguing right there, but let's also be very clear about the facts. We created and added $600 million in the HEROES Act for local law enforcement. And Mitch McConnell and the Senate said no. This has already been debunked by the Dallas Morning News. They've said that what you're saying is not true, Ms. Collins. This has already been debunked by Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins, who said this is not true. And, to say that when you vote for funding something and then the Senate says no, and they say, you have to come down on your costs, and then to say that that's defunding the police, that doesn't make any sense. It's not true. And I think you owe the people of North Texas the truth. And I don't think you should be running campaign ads, which is why I've called for you to take it down, that the paper itself, the paper record here in our community, the Dallas Morning News, has said is not true. You're trying to mislead people. You're trying to convince them that I'm something I'm not. And you're also doing it in a way that I think makes it harder for us to heal some of these racial wounds we're talking about. At a time when we should be coming together, you're pitting us against each other. And that's just what you're doing.
All right, let's move on to a different topic here too, because we're getting quite a few questions. Let's go to our first question from Matt Chiller here. He is asking about next year. Congress is due to pass a new 5-year transportation bill that would provide new funding options for highways and transit all across the state. What are your plans for infrastructure, and do you think that you can help to advance infrastructure as part of the jobs bill next year? Ms. Collins, we'll let you go first on this.
Sure. Infrastructure is a huge part of our economy. North Texas continues to grow and is booming. We've got to expand many of our highways. That's Highway 78 between Garland, Saxe, and Wiley. We have to look at expanding Central Expressway. If anyone's on it, you're sitting there for a long time. It's important that we actually look to expanding our highways. Texas receives the least in federal funding for our taxes. We pay more in taxes, rendering us the last donor state and get nothing in return. My opponent serves on the Infrastructure and Transportation Committee and yet doesn't talk anything about what's going on here locally in our community. Only talks about a high-speed rail system that's long-reaching and that will cost way more money than is projected. I think we have to take care of our immediate needs now, make sure that our community, as people continue to grow, as we can promote economic development, that we actually have the roadways, the highways to get it done and get people moving freely.
Same question for you, Congressman. What infrastructure projects are paramount here in North Texas in your district?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're not just going to be able to build roads. I'm on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And while our roads are extremely important, we've seen experts who testified before us that what we're going to have to do is be more efficient with the space that we have and diversify the transportation options that we offer folks. So that means, yes, investing in public transportation, investing in great ideas like a high-speed train between Dallas and Houston, which is a great idea. And there's no reason, if you want to represent Dallas, that you should be opposed to that. And, I got on this committee because I knew that we were one of the fastest growing places in the country and wanted to make sure that we could address some of these issues. And this entire term, I've hoped for a bigger package, but have been able to get some small wins by working with my colleagues in the area to try and improve things. Senator Cornyn and I introduced a bill together to leverage private investment in our public infrastructure. I'm working with Van Taylor on how to fix some of the traffic problems on I-75, particularly north of 635. And I have spoken with Joe Biden about his plan to build the next generation of American infrastructure, one that I think addresses our climate change concerns, but also prepares us for the future and diversifies and uses our space that we have more efficiently.
All right, let's shift off to education and a very specific question coming from our audience here. Critical to the academic recovery and advancement of our public education students is providing high-speed broadband to them, to all of them. So the question is, what specific steps will you take in Congress to solve this urgent need? And so many families have discovered this with the coronavirus going on now. Congressman Allred, we'll let you go first.
Yeah, well, we've seen that about a third of families in Dallas don't have access to high-speed internet. And this has worsened the achievement gap that was already existing in our community. And it's something that we have to address. And the way we do it, when we did this in the Obama administration through a pilot program called Connect Home, is you both incentivize and you try to subsidize efforts to expand high-speed internet everywhere. And so high-speed internet I think it's similar to any other utility that everyone should have access to it, whether it's electricity, water, the internet. To compete in this economy, to learn in this economy, you have to have it. And so you do it by both, as I said, trying to provide incentives to bring the cable providers into these communities that don't have it. We did that through offering them some incentives and then subsidizing them while they're in it, because you get them more customers. So they are going to get the customer base. But then once you get the infrastructure built out, it's a better deal for everyone. And so this is something that is a focus of mine. It's not just for our inner cities, it's also for our rural communities. I think that we can have bipartisan agreement around doing this. And we have some experience doing it in the past. So we just need to follow the models that have worked. But I think it's a combination of both incentivizing and subsidizing the efforts to expand that coverage.
Let's ask the same question to you, Genevieve. It's obviously education based, which you're familiar with, that's your industry, but I'm curious about these specific steps the questioner is asking, the specific steps that you will take in Congress to solve this urgent need.
Well, Jason, I love this question because I've spent the last 4 years advocating for this. I've actually written policy and legislation that can be implemented immediately in multiple states and nationally. So I'm ready to go. As I'm blessed enough to be elected to Congress. No child should ever be without an education just by default of not having access to consistent broadband or Wi-Fi. We have failed millions of kids now through this pandemic because they don't have access to broadband, Wi-Fi, or a consistent device. Dallas ISD is a great example of coming up with creative solutions, providing laptops with hotspots. But it is on the federal government's job, in my opinion, to make sure that an infrastructure bill contains consistent broadband and Wi-Fi for all communities, rural, urban, suburban. There are folks in Dallas, Richardson, Garland, Wiley that are all without internet. And this is not an equal and even playing field. I am ready to go. I've already got the legislation. I just needed a chance to be there.
Here's another question from one of our viewers. The person says, I'm an honorably discharged, disabled Vietnam veteran, and my question is for both congressional candidates. What are your plans to improve job opportunities for recently unemployed residents who lost their jobs in the pandemic? Congressman Allred, you can begin.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for your service. And this is, I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and we've worked extremely hard both to expand healthcare access for our veterans here in this community through getting the Garland VA Hospital and in our committee to try and help work with DOD as folks are transitioning out of the military to make sure they're getting access to good jobs. And, we have a lot of great corporate citizens here in North Texas who work very hard to hire veterans. But at the federal level, what we can do is continue to try and find partners who will help us hire veterans. But for those who have lost their jobs during this, we need to put in place targeted aid to try and help the parts of our economy that have been hardest hit. And we did that in our CARES Act 2.0, where we set aside $60 billion for women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses that had not gotten access through the PPP first round of funding. And so we tried to address that by using financial institutions that had a better record of reaching those kinds of businesses. But there are aspects of our economy that have been shut down by this. Those are the areas we need to target our aid, target our efforts.
And Genevieve, the same question for you as well, too. What specifically would you do if elected to help find people work who've lost their jobs during the pandemic?
Yeah, well, this Congress has failed to actually provide targeted aid to veterans that are disabled or folks that have lost their jobs. They've only done one payment of PPP and SBA loans. This is unacceptable. So my plan is, as a businesswoman, this is my wheelhouse. I work to create jobs. First, I think we have to invest in opportunity zones to uplift low-income communities. I believe we have to bring manufacturing jobs back from China. Garland is an incredible area with an already burgeoning manufacturing network. For folks in the IT world, Richardson has a fabulous innovation network that we need to expand. For veterans, we need to ensure that there are easier licensure programs that they can be licensed across multiple state lines. And I would really work to create federal grants for startups and entrepreneurs that they could participate and build out their own dreams and their own businesses, because that's something that this Congress has failed to do, is realize the dreams and keep those dreams afloat while people are struggling, whether that's small business or large corporations. We're trying to all get through right now. And it's important that we give everyone hope and access to the resource they need to keep their jobs going.
All right, that is your time, Ms. Collins. I want to ask another question from our audience here too. And a quick reminder, if you have questions for the candidates, please enter those in your chat function there. And we'll do our best to ask as many of these as we can. Congressman Allred, I want to begin with you with this question here. With the 1-year anniversary of the tornado impact in North Dallas, why is it that federal funds were lacking to support the rebuild of local businesses decimated by the tornado? Smaller impacted hurricanes and natural disasters in other parts of the country, they seem to garner a much larger response in other places of the U.S. So what in the world is going on there? Why didn't we qualify?
Well, Jason, this is a decision by FEMA that I disagree with and think that was decided wrongly. And, as you know, when the tornado tore through North Texas, it tore through many parts of my district. And there were different types of costs that we incurred, from our school districts to our traffic lights that were uninsured, and then those costs all add up and have to meet a certain threshold for.
Well, I think we lost the congressman for a moment. We'll get his signal reestablished here.
There he is.
You still with us, Congressman?
I don't know. I think so. All right. So where were we? So there's a threshold that has to be met for FEMA aid. And that you get to that threshold by adding up your costs and then making your application to FEMA. We did that here in North Texas, and they divided up our costs and said, these fall into different buckets. We're going to turn you down. So then I led the effort along with Senator Cornyn to appeal that decision. And they again turned us down. I completely disagree with the way they're using that program. I think that it goes against the intention of it. We're paying into that system. We should have gotten that aid.
Yeah, we should have gotten that aid, Jason. And it's been a giant letdown for everyone in Dallas and Garland and Richardson that's homes are devastated by the fact that our current representative didn't fight hard enough.
Well,
People are still without their homes.
Let me ask you though.
In their neighborhood, these homes are decimated. They're slabs, Jason.
But here, let me ask you specifically though. He talked about working with Senator Cornyn, and Senator Cornyn has talked about it as well too. They disagree with what FEMA decided. What more could you do or could you have done if you were in that position?
Well, I think honestly, having worked with school districts my entire career, having worked with Dallas ISD, Richardson ISD, I can work again with them on different funding formulas. I've done it from the education side, from an academic perspective. I can also do it from an infrastructure side. That's where we were really let down by FEMA, is looking at Dallas ISD and how that they were being charged for their devastation. And I think that my real working relationships with those folks already, and the mayor and the city council being able to negotiate and finally come to the table and really press FEMA. I mean, Pete Sessions got real FEMA relief for our community in 2015, and yet Congressman Allred can't do it in 2019. I think that we have precedents here in North Texas for FEMA to come in and support us, and I think that this has been a massive failure on this congressman, and clearly our communities are still devastated.
I want to ask you a specific question, Ms. Collins.
Jason, can I just respond to that very briefly?
You guys, we can add 30 seconds to both of you here. Go ahead, Congressman.
This is not about an advocacy. It's not about a negotiation, Ms. Collins. This is about having an administration that is incompetent, and they made the wrong decision. And that's not just my opinion. That's also the opinion of John Cornyn. That's the opinion of Governor Abbott, who's also a part of our appeal. We worked on a bipartisan basis. I gathered every single member of Congress across this state who had tornado damage or had other storm damage from that same storm system that came through, joined a letter that I led to FEMA to try and convince them to change their mind, and they still did not. So listen, we worked as hard as we possibly could, but this administration is responsible for us not getting the funding that we deserve.
Ms. Collins, you get 30 more seconds. Go ahead.
I'll just say, you wrote a letter. I would march up to their offices in DC, bang on their doors, and say, we're meeting in person and we're going to work this together. You can't just write a letter. That's just a cop-out. That's not serving our communities. And as a businesswoman, I would be the advocate for our community that you were not able to deliver.
I want to shift off to a different topic here. Ms. Collins, you're broadcasting ads right now, which are critical of Congressman Allred, saying that he votes with Speaker Pelosi 100% of the time. Do you pledge here today that if elected, you would not vote with your party 100% of the time?
Yes.
Congressman Allred, would you like to add anything to that, because you're the target of those ads?
Yeah, well, she's cherry picking statistics. Let's be honest here, and the Dallas Morning News has run a story on this, and I appreciate them looking into it as well. The Speaker of the House votes less than 10% of the time, less than 10% of the time. And when she does vote, it's on important pieces of legislation, like lowering the cost of prescription drugs or keeping the government open. The Chamber of Commerce, who endorsed me, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, when they endorsed me, looked at my record, and they gave me a 95% bipartisan rating, 95%. 70% of the bills that I've co-sponsored in Congress have been bipartisan. I've worked extremely hard in a bipartisan fashion to get things done. And these ads that she's running is just cherry picking statistics. That's all it is.
Well, Jason, let's talk about statistics, because as a businesswoman, I have an MBA. I love statistics. Now, the congressman had 78 chances to not vote with Nancy Pelosi, yet elected not to not to exercise any of those. The congressman currently votes with his own party 98% of the time. This is public information. These are not lies. These are just facts that Congressman Allred is a completely ineffective Washington partisan party line politician who has passed 0 bills while he's been in office. And let's just, for contrast's sake, talk about Representative Dan Crenshaw. He's in Houston. He's in the minority. He also serves in the same freshman class that Congressman Allred serves in. He's passed 5 bills while he's been in office. Congressman Allred's passed 0. He just passes the buck down the line and waits for Nancy Pelosi to tell him how to vote. And again, he has his own mind, or at least that's what he told us in 2018, that he'd be an independent voice. But he follows his party 98% of the time. I find that unacceptable.
Congressman, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond to that.
But that's clearly, of course, not what the Chamber of Commerce thought, and that's why they gave me a 95% bipartisan rating for the work that I've done. But she keeps bringing up this bills being passed. Naming a post office is nice, but it's not actually helping people. I have put an entire hospital in Garland that we got transferred from Baylor Scott and White to the VA, creating 5,000 jobs, serving 184,000 veterans better. That hospital is valued at $400 million. For us to build that, it would be $800 million to $1 billion. That wasn't a piece of legislation. That was work that I did behind the scenes to get that done. That's how we got that done. That's doing something with your role in Congress. So let's talk about that, because there's more you can do than your voting record. You can be an advocate. You can take good ideas and turn them into policy. That's what I did with the Garland VA.
And that's a great example of my opponent taking credit for other people's work. The Garland City Council worked on this VA, Jason, for 2 years prior to the congressman even being elected. The Garland City Council and city manager worked with Baylor Scott and White to actually create this. This is not, the congressman's taking credit for everyone else's hard work. He may have helped get it over the finish line at the end, but I think it's absolutely egregious for you to say that you single-handedly got this done when by default, everyone else had all the work. You just helped at the end.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll jump in here just for a second. For clarity, I don't think he said he single-handedly did it, but that he was an advocate for it. So I do want to ask one more question here too.
Well, let me just say this, Jason. That's absolutely not true. It's not true. What
commercials say otherwise.
No. Let me speak, please. That's not true what you said. I worked with our city council in Garland and with the mayor to get that done, but this would not have happened. And I'll be very clear with you. This would not have happened if I had not brought these parties to the table. This administration called me a few months before we got this deal done and said they were pulling out of it entirely. It took dozens of meetings and calls and emails to get this done. So just because you don't understand what went into it doesn't mean that I wasn't a very, very important part of it. So let's just make that very clear.
Let's shift off to a different topic here. This is going to be the final question because I realized that I didn't give you guys an opportunity for opening statements. So my apologies for that, guys. But here's the last question that we've been asked a couple of times here. Do you support the DISD bond election propositions, and what can be done on the federal level to improve public education in collaboration with local and state governments? Congressman Allred, we'll let you begin.
Absolutely. I support this bond 100%. I'm a DISD grad. My mom taught in DISD. I believe that we need to continue some of the great work that's being done by DISD and moving forward. And, we do need to support at the federal level great advances in some of the policies that's happening in school districts like DISD and like Garland ISD, like Richardson ISD. But we do that by making sure also that they don't have enormous budget shortfalls, and that's what they're going to be facing. In this next session of the Texas legislature, they're going to be looking at a $27 billion shortfall. $27 billion, that's the same amount they looked at when we had the 09-10 recession. And we saw what they did then. They made very deep cuts to education funding. And so when you see someone like me saying in the HEROES Act that we had funding for state and local governments to cover the revenue shortfalls that they have incurred during this crisis, this is what we're talking about, is to ensure that when we get to the budgeting process at the state and local level, that they're not having to make deep, deep cuts to education, because that's going to set us back. And that's one of the things that we've been fighting so hard for in these HEROES Act provisions that we passed.
All right, Ms. Collins, same question to you.
Could you repeat the question? Forgive me.
Yeah, absolutely. The question is, do you support the DISD bond election propositions, and what can be done on the federal level to improve public school education in collaboration with local and state governments?
Well, I am proud to have my entire career serving public schools. ranging from every school district that makes up this congressional district to some of the smallest school districts in West Texas to some of the largest school districts all in the country. I have had a depth and breadth of experience working in the education sector, and I know that education is always squeezed. Their budgets are always squeezed. The best way the federal government can help is get out of the way. We need to be giving more money back down to state and local control so that Dallas ISD doesn't have to have these massive bonds, but that they are actually in control of their own destiny and budgets. I think we have far too much oversight from the federal government, that way too many hamstrings, that the local government, local school district can make these better decisions. I think we have to take care of our local school districts. All of the bonds, are really looking out for doing what's best for kids. And that's what we need to be talking about in education. How do we do what's best for kids?
And just for clarity, Ms. Collins, do you support the bond propositions that are on the ballot right now?
I do.
Okay. Guys, I was so excited to get this thing going. I completely jumped over your opening statements. I'm sure you guys had those ready to go. But because of that, we were originally going to do 1 minute for closing statements. We're going to give you guys 2 minutes each for closing statements. And Ms. Collins, you can go first here.
Sure. Well, Jason, thank you for hosting. I guess we're all fired up, ready to go. Thanks to the Dallas Regional Chamber and North Dallas Chamber, Richardson Chamber for hosting. Congressman Allred, thank you for your time being with me and having a spirited and lively conversation. I'm born and raised here. I went to school here. I've built a business here, and I've worked with every school district that makes up this congressional district. I believe as a businesswoman, my experience, real meaningful experience, creating jobs, balancing a budget, forecasting growth, is exactly what we need to get our economy back on track. And I'm the only person in this arena that actually has that experience. My opponent talks about being a bipartisan politician, but as I pointed out, he votes with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time. His own voting record demonstrates that he votes 98% of the time with his own party. That's not called bipartisan. And I think that he's been incredibly ineffective Washington party line politician, having passed 0 bills while in Congress and only co-sponsoring everyone else's good ideas. I think that he's taken credit for everyone else's decisions, whether it's USMCA, the Garland VA, or a myriad of healthcare issues. And I think that his voting record has to be what we discuss. He votes with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time. He voted to remove funding from the police, $600 million. That's called defunding the police. He refuses to sanction Chinese Communist Party for practicing cyber espionage, and he supports raising taxes, especially coming out of a global pandemic. These are not these are not North Texas values. These are DC values. And I believe that there is a real difference between a DC endorsement from the US Chamber of Commerce, which is the largest lobbying organization in America, versus real Dallas experience building a business, making sure everyone has a chance to achieve their American dream. I believe the choice is clear, and I'd be honored to have your vote.
All right, Ms. Collins, thank you. Congressman Allred.
Well, thank you, Jason, for moderating, and to WFAA and to the Dallas Regional Chamber and the North Dallas Chamber and the Richardson Chamber for putting this on. It's been the honor of my life to represent this community, where I was born and raised by a single mother who taught in the public school system that I grew up in. I know that my story was made possible by this community, by the people, the institutions, and the policies that gave me a chance to chase my version of the American dream. And that's why I've tried to work so hard to represent this community in Congress. I'm proud of the work that we've done together by being inclusive and available, holding 25 town halls. And I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish, from the Garland VA to the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, to standing up for your healthcare and against efforts to take it away. As many of you know, my wife and I had a son a month into my time in Congress, our first child, Jordan, who's now 20 months old. And like many of you, when this pandemic hit, our life changed dramatically. We had to take Jordan out of daycare and care for him at home while both of us were working full time. We've driven back and forth to DC several times because my son can't wear a mask on a plane. We've learned to rotate who's on child duty and who's doing the work. And so I know what you're going through right now. I know the struggles that so many families are facing. I know your top concern isn't my opponent's misleading attacks. Your top concern is this pandemic and where we go from here. You're worried about your kids and your businesses and your grandparents. You know, many of you have had to learn how to work from home while caring for kids who don't have a school to go to. Maybe you've had to tell your boss that you'll get her that memo after your kids go to sleep. Employers have learned to be more flexible, and you're waiting to see if you're going to get the help that your industry needs to survive. And you've seen a president supported by my opponent, who she praised just yesterday for his response to this virus, who has no plan to beat this virus and is obsessed with all the wrong things. You know, we can do better. We have a choice now in this election between leaders who'll tell you the truth or leaders who'll just say anything to get elected. I think I know which the folks of North Texas are going to choose. Thank you so much. I ask for your vote and the honor of continuing to represent you in Congress.
All right, here's the last question. Have you guys voted yet? Genevieve? You have? Okay. Colin, you voted? You did?
Yes, I did. I voted on Monday.
All right. Congressman?
Now, my wife and I are going to go next week. I encourage everyone to vote in the last week of early voting.
All right. Guys, thanks so much. We appreciate it. There are, I'll just remind you, our viewers here, there are a lot of races on the ballot you'll see when you go vote. If you've already voted, you've seen this. Not all the candidates in all those races are willing to get together like these two have to exchange ideas, to debate ideas. And it means a lot to the democracy for both of these candidates to actually do that. So we appreciate that. And we know this because, you know, at Channel 8, we reach out to a lot of candidates, a lot of races, asking them to debate. And, you know, not all of them do. So that said, we appreciate your time. Congressman Allred and Ms. Collins, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Dale right now, the President and CEO of the Dallas Regional Chamber, for closing remarks.
Okay, trying to get my video working here, Jason. Let's see.
You tell me what to say, Dale. I'll say it.
All right, well, I'll say it without my picture on the screen. First of all, Congressman, here we go. All right. There we go. Congressman Allred and Ms. Collins, on behalf of the Dallas Regional Chamber, the Richardson Chamber, the North Dallas Chamber, thank you, as Jason said, for putting yourselves out there and sharing your views with us today. Thank you, Jason, for doing a great job of moderating. You're well-informed, you're even-handed, and your questions help shed light on the important issues that voters are going to have to decide on over the next couple of weeks. This is a very important election. We know that you're studying the issues. We know you're studying the candidates. You can vote now through Friday, October 30th, or you can vote on Election Day, the traditional way to vote, on Tuesday, November 3rd. If you want more information about where to go, how to vote, you can go visit northtexasvotes.com or .org, northtexasvotes.org. Sorry about that, to learn more. A few other important dates coming up. Tuesday, November 10th, we're hosting our State of the Workforce event featuring Brian Daniel, who's the chairman of the Texas Workforce Commission in Austin. 2 days later, on Thursday, November 12th, we'll have our annual Year Ahead event. So we're so excited this year to feature David Solomon, who's the CEO and chairman of Goldman Sachs, and Stacy Cunningham, the president of the New York Stock Exchange. They'll discuss this challenging year, what we might expect in the year ahead, what it means for your business, for your life, and for our country. So all these events are virtual, and you can visit our website, dallaschamber.org, to register for any of our events and to stay informed of all that we're working on. Thanks again for joining us today. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day.